Story 1. Australia lost a Prime Minister. Harold Holt went out for a swim at Portsea Beach one day and was never seen again. No body, nothing. Of course, there were rumors about a Chinese submarine waiting offshore to whisk him away, but nothing was ever proven. Then Melbourne Council named a swimming pool after him. True story. Story 2. We in Ireland accidentally legalized ketamine and ecstasy for one day. They were the best of times, they were the worst of times. We also sent a turkey to the Eurovision Song Contest, but sure look. Story 3. Canada has a strategic maple syrup reserve. Bonus fact. There was a heist. Story 4. We have more saunas per capita than street-legal cars. There are roughly 2.7 million cars, not including larger vehicles such as trucks, semi-trailers, buses, trains, and military vehicles, and 3.2 million saunas in Finland. Story 5. Every year, the whole country gathers with their families to burn an effigy of a man who almost blew up our parliament 400 years ago. Story 6. Canada. My hometown of Winnipeg is indirectly the namesake of Winnie the Pooh and is occasionally colder than the surface of Mars. Also, the Red Scare that was prevalent in the United States in the late 1940s and early 1950s started in Canada with the Gouzenko affair, when a main intelligence directorate agent at the Soviet embassy in Ottawa defected and brought with him evidence of a massive Soviet spy ring in North America. Story 7. The Choctaw Nation sent $170 to Ireland during the potato famine in the 1840s. This was a significant amount for the Choctaw to collect and send at the time, especially because they were experiencing their own crop-related issues. Story 8. Brazil, alongside Argentina and Uruguay, killed off about 90% of the male population of Paraguay during the war in the 19th century. Paraguay was on its way to becoming a local power but was set back to the Stone Age. A personal anecdote. My great-grandfather was Paraguayan. We infer he immigrated here shortly after the war, but cannot be sure. About 20 years ago, my aunt went to the Paraguayan consulate in our state capital to see if we could access his documents without traveling to Paraguay. The clerk told her, supposedly in a rude manner, that no documents from that time were available. He said, "Los Brasileiros lo han queimado tudo," which means, the Brazilians burnt everything. Thankfully, that was the last war we took part in aside from World War II, but then we were fighting Nazis, so it is considered justified. Story 9. In my country, there is an interesting event that happens every year in a small town called La Lluvia de Pex, or the Rain of Fish. During heavy storms, fish fall from the sky, likely sucked up by waterspouts and dropped on land. Locals collect the fish for food. There have been some studies and several explanations, but nothing has been completely confirmed. Story 10. In 1946, Bulgaria's ruling monarch was exiled when the Communist Party took over. He was 9 years old at the time. 45 years later, communism fell, and he returned to become prime minister. Now, he is one of only 2 people who are still alive and were heads of state during World War II. Story 11. Poland. A bear called Wojciech fought in our army in World War II and carried ammunition during the Battle of Monte Cassino. He also liked to drink beer and smoke cigarettes, and eat at the same time. He held the rank of corporal during his time in the army. He was bought by our soldiers in Syria, later lived in Italy, and eventually in Scotland, where he was placed in a zoo and died in 1963. He never actually visited Poland, but we have statues of him in different Polish cities. His statues are also in Italy and Scotland. Story 12. Argentina's national sport is not soccer. It is duck, played with the carcass of a duck. Nobody practices it like they did 100 years ago. Story 13. For 7 years, the Prime Minister of my country was an openly lesbian woman who has a son with her partner, even though same-sex marriage and adoption for same-sex couples are illegal in my country. Today, she is the President of the Parliament. Story 14. Indian women collectively hold an estimated 24,000 tons of gold, which is more than the combined gold reserves of the top 5 gold-holding countries. Story 15. In France, 2 regions, Alsace and Moselle, are not fully secular, and church and state are not completely separated. I grew up with mandatory Christian studies in public school between the ages of 5 and 10. We have more public holidays than the rest of France, and our social security is also slightly better. We have many specificities due to the fact that these regions were part of Germany for a long time. Honestly, even French people barely know this. Story 16. I don't think I would finish today if I listed all of them, so let's keep it at 5. We have already elected an animal as a politician twice. There is a larger population of Lebanese people outside Lebanon than inside. At one point, women were banned from wearing bikinis on the beaches. At one point, we had the capital of a European country. Our biggest contribution in World War I was killing a group of dolphins in the Mediterranean because we thought they were a German submarine. Story 17. Contraception was only legalized in Ireland in 1980. Homosexuality was only decriminalized in 1993. Divorce was only legalized in 1995. Story 18. Before invading Spain, Napoleon sent a formal letter to the crown along the lines of, "Do not worry about my armies crossing the border. We are just on our way to Portugal." No one suspected anything until he was literally knocking on the gates of our capital. Story 19. Currently, 500,000 people in the Serbian capital are protesting against the fascist regime, which is using tear gas and weapons against its own citizens in support of the fascist forces. This fight has been ongoing for 7 months, and the government-controlled media is attempting to silence the events. Story 20. India has 1,000-year-old temple carvings depicting people engaged in various sexual positions, including homosexual acts, on religious monuments. The temples of Khajuraho and Konark are covered in highly detailed erotic sculptures, such as threesomes, orgies, and homosexual acts. All of these are carved in stone, dating back to the 10th century. It is essentially stone pornography. Meanwhile, homosexuality was illegal in India until 2018. Story 21. 60% of our country would be reclaimed by the sea if we had done nothing about water management in the past 500 years. More than half of it exists because human beings are very smart. Edit. Yes, the Netherlands. Story 22. In Australia, you are never more than 50 meters away from a snake. 1 in 3 houses in Brisbane has a resident snake living in the roof. Story 23. We had a woman crowned king instead of queen. Her husband met diplomats from our country in the baths half-naked to show how civilized he is. We enlisted a bear in the military and had him reach a high rank in the artillery division. We are a surprising nation in general. Edit. The story about an unarmed plane shooting down a German fighter was misattributed in one of the books I read. It was not a poll. Therefore, I am removing it. Story 24. The Soviet Union dropped 450 nuclear bombs near my town. No one was evacuated, and people are still born with deformities. Cancer is prevalent. Story 25. Icelanders are obsessed with making buildings that are difficult to live in, based on brutalist architecture, and then imposing them on people and communities. The most recent buildings in this style are inspired by Nazi design. Story 26. The Geneva Convention is largely written due to the actions of my country, and later our military referred to it as the Geneva Suggestion. Story 27. My country has the largest wine cellar in the world, stretching approximately 200 kilometers, 120 miles. Additionally, we have a man in our country who holds the world record for owning the biggest horseshoe collection, with over 12,000 items. He has his own museum displaying all his collections. It is a pretty fun place to visit. Story 28. My country experienced a war in which one regiment mistook another regiment for the enemy and killed or wounded approximately 10,000 of their own troops in friendly fire. Story 29. 2 of our states went to war over land, even though one of them did not share a border. They fought 3 times with the same states involved each time. Story 30. The Central Intelligence Agency conducted extensive LSD and hallucinogenic experiments at a mental hospital with the assistance of researchers. As part of their preparation, the researchers had to experience LSD prior to treating patients there. Story 31. Our country had quite a few notable events. A president died while spending time with a lady, and another was known for erratic behavior. La Dune du Pilot, a well-known tourist spot, slowly shifts over time. There is apparently an heir supposedly of royal blood, belonging to the royal family dating back before the revolution. Nobody can confirm they are truly an heir of the royal family through time, 246 years and 10 generations later. Story 32. In England, it is illegal to handle a salmon suspiciously according to the Salmon Act of 1986. Also, in England, it is prohibited for a Welshman to be in the city of Chester before dawn and after sunset. I love this country. Story 33. Mississippi was the last state in the United States of America to ratify the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. This occurred in 2013. While Mississippi certainly has its history of slavery, this was more of a bookkeeping issue. In the United States of America, as long as 3/4 of the total number of states ratify an amendment to the United States Constitution, it becomes law for everyone. Even though Mississippi voted against the 13th Amendment, enough states voted for it. Now it is federal law. At that point, a state ratifying the amendment is more of a formality rather than having any real impact. In the mid-1990s, someone realized that Mississippi still had not voted for it. The state legislature came together and voted unanimously to end slavery, but the paperwork was not submitted, and no one noticed until it was properly addressed in 2013. Story 34. Our country is known for having some of the most passive-aggressive people on the planet, but somehow we have tricked the rest of the world into thinking we are the nicest people. I think it is interesting that you all believe that. Story 35. In 1958, we accidentally dropped a nuclear bomb on our own country, in the state of South Carolina. Fortunately, it did not detonate because of a faulty assembly of the nuclear detonator. Story 36. The United States tried to send all the enslaved people back to Africa and soon realized it was mathematically impossible, especially given the means of the day. This is how Liberia was founded. Story 37. Norway, often mentioned as one of the most well-run countries in the world, runs on caffeine. We drink large amounts of coffee and are one of the world's top consumers per capita. But it doesn't stop there. Pepsi Max is our top-selling soft drink, making us the only country where diet soda outsells sugary soda. We alone drink over 9% of the world's Pepsi Max. Clearly, caffeine is the secret to surviving the cold and dark winters. Story 38. Italian troops surrounded American troops at gunpoint in Sicily in 1985. Due to a conflict in jurisdiction between the Italian government and the United States government over the hijacking of an Italian cruise ship and the killing of an American citizen. A plane carrying the hijackers was intercepted by American jets and forced to land in Sicily at the military air base of Sigonella. This base hosted an American base fully under United States jurisdiction. However, the plane stopped on the Italian side, so the Italian military at the base were immediately sent to surround the aircraft to prevent the Americans from taking the hijackers without a legal extradition order. The United States military on the American aircraft were ordered to surround the Italian soldiers because they wanted access to the aircraft. An Italian military police force was then sent to surround the Americans. This resulted in a standoff with 3 groups of Allied soldiers pointing guns at each other. The situation was resolved the next morning when the Italian army began mobilizing heavier troops toward the aircraft. At that point, the Reagan administration decided it was not worth escalating further and ordered the soldiers to stand down. Story 39. We are the only country besides the Vatican where divorce is illegal. That is just one of the many problems we have here. Story 40. We are the only country in the world where Coca-Cola or Coca-Cola made Fanta is not the #1 selling soft drink. It is Earn Brew. Story 41. We have both the largest air force in the world, the United States Air Force, and the second largest air force, the United States Navy. This fact has always amazed me. No affordable healthcare, poor work-life balance, and the government does not seem to care about its citizens, but we have a large number of military aircraft. Story 42. We have a university that predates the Aztecs by 229 years. It might not quite qualify for the nobody knows it criteria, but it is a fun and still to me hard to believe fact. Story 43. Our last prime minister secretly appointed himself to 5 ministerial positions without the knowledge of the public or his own government. Story 44. In Argentina, if you have your 7th son or 7th daughter, meaning you need 6 children of the same sex first, regardless of having some of a different sex in between. Then he or she can receive a presidential godparenthood. This status grants actual benefits in life, such as free education including university, along with some allowances. Although public education is available for all, this is an official law. The tradition originates from an ancient European myth that the child could be a werewolf or a witch. Story 45. The police used to arrest unmarried women for becoming pregnant and bring them to workhouses where they were imprisoned and forced to work, sometimes for the rest of their lives. Once the babies were born, they were sold to wealthy Americans who did not know the children were taken illegally. This practice continued until at least the 1970s and was organized by the Catholic Church. Story 46. Belgium supplied the uranium for the Manhattan Project. It went something like this. Belgium government in exile. So we hear you need this uranium. United States government. What? No, we do not. And if we did, that would be top secret. Seriously, who talked? Belgium. Does not matter. Congo is one of 2 uranium deposits in Allied hands. We have 1,200 tons of the rare ore. Do you want it? United States. Yes. If you can get it to the African coast, we can transport it across the Atlantic. Belgium. No need. It is already in the United States. United States. It what? Belgium. It is rare material. So when we moved all our gold, silver, and other valuables here at the start of the war, we included the uranium. It has been in a warehouse on Staten Island for the past 4 years. United States. Yes, we will take it all. Story 47. The last residential school, which abducted indigenous children from their families and placed them in Christian schools where they were abused, poorly fed, and lost their culture, closed in 1996. This is not ancient history. Much of our nutrition knowledge is based on unethical experiments conducted on these children and other indigenous communities without consent and without any of the ethical procedures now in place to protect research subjects. Story 48. Sweden was involved in an ongoing genocide up until at least 1980, where the Sami people were sterilized at a far higher rate. Their children were taken from them to live in proper families. Swedes do not tend to know this most often, but we have really done a number on the Sami people. Story 49. A few years ago, they finally changed the rape definition in the law. Before the update, rape was defined as a man's penis forced inside a woman's vagina, and nothing else. So if the aggression involved forced fellatio, an object inside the vagina or anus, forced fingering, a man raping another man, a woman raping a man, or a man raping a woman by sodomy, it was not technically considered rape by the law. This was absolutely disgusting for the victims. Story 50. Canit is an irrigation system that brings water from aquifers in the foothills to the surface of farmlands. It is a small tunnel underground with a gentle slope. To construct it, workers dig numerous wells along the route. Iran has many canits, and their total length could circle the Earth several times, although this may have decreased due to modern wells. Story 51. We hold the world record for the most days without a fully elected government. From December 2018 to October 2020, Belgium had no federal government and was governed by an interim government for 652 days, beating the previous world record holder of 541 days, which was also Belgium. Story 52. Singapore is likely the only country that has increased its landmass by 25% without war or territorial disputes. This was achieved through land reclamation from the sea. Story 53. We Dutch like to eat raw herring. We take it out of its small tray, dip its headless body into chopped onions, lift it above our mouths, and bite off a big chunk. Story 54. Australia is older than you think. It is the oldest continent by far. We used to have mountains as high as Mount Everest. They have been worn down now to something that is basically a ridge of hills that you would not even notice. In the 1990s, a man stumbled across a gorge that had protected a species of tree described as a living fossil, although without a clear fossil record. It is unclear how unchanged it is. There are fewer than 60 trees left in the wild, all in a few locations near each other. There is no genetic variability between them, meaning they may have reduced to a population of 1 or 2 in the past. They cultivate well, though, so you can buy one and plant it all over the world. The soil here is so old it has been leached of many nutrients, meaning that to grow European crops, those nutrients must be added back in. Otherwise, the crops simply will not grow the same. Tasmania has so little iodine in its soil that people used to get goiters until iodine was added to salt as a supplement. Australia also has the world's oldest continuing culture. There are oral histories that describe the end of the last glacial period and the rise of sea levels. Australia was so dry during the 2000s that some country children did not see rain until they were about 5 years old. The concept of rain existed only in books and stories. I remember being amazed at how clouds could fill the sky. I felt that even in 2020 as an adult, after another years-long drought. It was like seeing the ocean for the first time. This place is so big that there were still groups of uncontacted indigenous people in the 1980s. Some of them are still alive. You could speak to people who grew up with no knowledge that the world had changed. We have a species of tree that grows to over 100 meters tall, essentially because that type of tree is designed to burn in fires but grows in a place that receives so much rain it never burns down. So it just keeps growing until it reaches the height where it cannot pull water up the trunk anymore. The Emu War was not actually a war. It was a poorly executed cull, essentially to give some returned soldiers something to do. It is not interesting and is overdone. It only gets mentioned because people on the internet think it is funny. Imagine thinking that America's most interesting story is about building a road that got potholes in its first year, or that England's most interesting story is about a bland shopping center. There are countless more interesting topics to discuss that do not make you look foolish. Story 55. As Americans, we are taught about slavery and the Trail of Tears. However, we were rarely informed about how the country treated Japanese Americans in the 1940s and 1950s. It was terrible. This history is not as widely known as slavery and the genocide of indigenous peoples. Story 56. My country had its own RuPaul-style drag celebrity named Evita Bezuidenhout who dressed like RuPaul and discussed politics like Bill Maher. Story 57. Ireland once had a law that made it illegal to be drunk in your own home. Under the Licensing Act of 1872, it was technically illegal to be drunk in any public or private place, including your own house. The law stated that every person found drunk in any highway or other public place, whether a building or not, or on any licensed premises, shall be liable to a penalty. In court cases, any place was occasionally argued to include your own kitchen if it was accessible to others or if others were present. While rarely enforced, the law remained in effect for over 100 years. Bonus fact: it was once illegal in Ireland to be drunk while in charge of a cow. Yes, you could literally be penalized for drunk cow handling. Story 58. My country has more than half of all the roundabouts in the world, and almost twice as many roundabouts as the second most roundabout-heavy country. To be honest, I find it surprising that other countries do not have more roundabouts. I find them much more comfortable to navigate than crossroads or traffic lights. Edit. That country is France. Story 59. My country has a tradition at Easter where men hit women with a stick, and they reward them with a chicken egg. Story 60. Mexico distributed radioactive milk between 1986 and 1987. This dehydrated milk had been bought from Ireland around the time after the Chernobyl disaster. Ireland was hit by a radioactive cloud, which affected all people and products, including the dehydrated milk sold to Mexico. Story 61. The United States has a lake with a statue of Jason Voorhees, the fictional serial killer from the Friday the 13th horror movies, chained to the bottom. In 2013, a diver placed a 150-pound statue of Jason, complete with his iconic hockey mask and machete, at the bottom of Crystal Lake in Minnesota as a quirky underwater art installation. It is still there, about 120 feet underwater, and is a bizarre secret known mostly to local divers and horror fans who visit to see it. Story 62. In my country, Taiwan, you might see pole dancers at religious events and funerals. There are companies that specialize in these kinds of events where they drive trucks with pole dancers on the back and parade them around. You can also hire professional criers at funerals. The louder, the better. Story 63. Australia is an important part of the United States space program and has been from the beginning. We received the first television signals from the moon at Honeysuckle Creek near Canberra, not Parkes, and the dish that received them is still just outside our capital city. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration still has a deep space tracking station in Australia, which contains the only dish that can contact Voyager 2. Story 64. Canadian soldiers were so fierce that no one wanted to be taken prisoner by them during World War I. The world established rules called the Geneva Conventions. Story 65. New Zealanders are not named after the kiwi bird, but after a brand of English boot polish called Kiwi Boot Polish, which was heavily used by New Zealand troops during World War I and World War II to waterproof their boots and prevent trench foot. The Allies, including Australians, British, and others in the trenches with New Zealand soldiers, thought it was a fitting name to call the New Zealand soldiers Kiwis, and the name stuck by the end of the war. Also, kiwi fruit is not originally from New Zealand. It is originally from China, where it was known as the Chinese gooseberry. New Zealand grows and exports a large quantity of it, and because New Zealanders are called Kiwis, the Chinese gooseberry was renamed kiwi fruit. Story 66. Abortion is completely illegal in the United Kingdom. However, a modern law states that if 2 or more reputable doctors confirm that your abortion is necessary, then the government is required to defend your criminal conviction on your behalf. This defense, which is against the government itself, typically results in a settlement of nothing. This is a flawed workaround because updating or codifying the legal system properly is considered too difficult. Story 67. Sir Nils Olav III, Baron of the Bouvet Islands, is a major general in the Norwegian army. He was knighted by King Harald V and now holds the 3rd highest rank in the Norwegian armed forces. Story 68. One lake in Scotland, Loch Ness, holds more water than all the lakes, rivers, and reservoirs in England and Wales combined. Story 69. Everyone thinks we are a small island nation, probably because our big brother country is a literal continent, but it would take you 27 hours non-stop to drive from the top of the country to the bottom, including the ferry ride. Story 70. From the United Kingdom, but you know how we have different accents. For example, if you were to go from Liverpool to Birmingham, there would be 2 different accents. It is the same with our cows. They also have regional accents. Story 71. Americans mistakenly believed that 1/3 was less than 1/4, which derailed an entire hamburger campaign in the 1980s. Story 72. Spain is currently a very secular country where the Catholic Church has lost almost all its influence. People enjoy the folklore of religion but do not practice it actively. Few people under the age of 60 attend Mass regularly. Story 73. The original stormtroopers were Canadian, named by the German soldiers of the First World War. They were known for their innovation, speed, and brutality. The Canadians' legacy in the First World War is exemplified by how they were viewed by those who fought with and against them. After facing Canadian soldiers at the Battle of the Somme, the Germans began calling them Sturmtruppen, or stormtroopers, because of their bravery and speed in battle. Story 74. Canada and Denmark used to take turns claiming an island by placing a bottle of alcohol on it. Canada placed a bottle of rye whiskey, and Denmark placed cognac. They have since signed a proper treaty creating a border and dividing the island. Story 75. The Philippines is one of only 2 countries where divorce is not legal. The other country is the Vatican. Story 76. There are 574 independent sovereign nations within the United States, and over half of the entire state territory of Oklahoma is a sovereign Indian nation. Story 77. Mutiny, sunken treasure, desertion, murder, starvation, massacre, sexual slavery, treachery, drownings, poisoning of babies, and bloody battles were all part of the terrible fate of passengers on board the Batavia, which shipwrecked on Western Australia's Barren Abrolhos Islands in 1629. This horrific ordeal was caused by one Dutch passenger, Geronimus Cornelis, who led a brutal campaign that resulted in 125 men, women, children, and babies being murdered for no apparent reason. Historians consider it to be Australia's first mass murder, and Geronimus to be the world's first documented psychopath. Story 78. 1.2 million African slaves died in transit to the United States. So many deaths caused sharks to change their migration. I do not think there is a monument for this. Story 79. We used to put women who became pregnant outside of marriage in prison. Then, when the baby was born, we took the children from their mothers and sold them to Americans. The mother had to work for another 2 years to pay for these services. This system was in place as late as 1996. Story 80. 26 bishops of the Church of England have automatic seats in the House of Lords. They are called the Lords Spiritual. The only other country with a parliament that has reserved seats for clerics is Iran. Story 81. Basically, we are the sole reason that the word defenestration even exists. When we did not agree with our political Christian system, we just threw people of power out of windows. The action of throwing someone out of a window comes from Latin, to meaning out, and fenestra meaning window. Honorable mention, we drink the most beer in the world. Story 82. My country has more dialects than cities. 200 years ago, people said every village had its own dialect, and you could not understand what a villager from the next town behind the hill was saying. But it is all the same language, and the country we have now is united by this language, German. Story 83. We had a man fight in World War II with a broadsword, a bow, and his bagpipes. His name was Mad Jack Churchill, and he survived the war. After the war, on his way home from work, he would throw his briefcase off the train before his stop. This was because the train passed by his house, and he was able to either throw it into the garden or through the window instead of carrying it. Story 84. People think Austria just joined Germany before World War II. In actuality, Adolf Hitler was threatening to invade us, but our head of state, Engelbert Dollfuss, did not back down. He did not like Hitler. We were in a tough spot because our biggest ally at the time, Italy, had betrayed us by agreeing to support Germany instead of Austria. This led to fear and unrest among the population. Hitler's party used that unrest to cause a civil war in Austria, which ended when supporters of Hitler killed our head of state. The next head of state was one of Hitler's supporters. All the while, Hitler pretended not to be involved in anything his supporters were doing. Story 85. Aotearoa, New Zealand is bigger than it looks on the map. If we were in Europe, we would go from Denmark to the south of France, and that does not include the ocean territory. Story 86. Our national food in Jordan was first made to celebrate our victory against Jewish people. It was purposefully made to not be kosher. It became popular because it was served at important government events to identify Israeli spies. Story 87. I live in the United States, and I do not think we have any of those anymore. Everyone knows all our facts because facts are all we have anymore. Story 88. There are places in Romania where it is almost entirely Hungarian-speaking. People in these areas sometimes refuse to speak Romanian despite being in Romania. If you speak Romanian to them, they pretend not to understand it, even though they do. Story 89. My country buys twice as much bird food as all other European countries combined. Our birds' beaks are evolving to be longer as they adapt to feeding from bird feeders, especially those of tit species. Story 90. A crowd killed and partially ate one of our less popular politicians. So much for Dutch tolerance. This also shows we do not have much of a cuisine. Story 91. America has a president who is a convicted felon and has been ordered by the court to pay his rape victim and the children with cancer from whom he embezzled money. He is also a serial adulterer supported by Christian ministers. Story 92. There is a town in Canada where everyone keeps their cars unlocked so strangers can take refuge if a polar bear appears. Story 93. Canada did not kill off First Nations people in the same way the United States did. Canada got them to agree to the treaties, then took their land away and gave them reserves on poor land. Schools were created where children were kidnapped and forced to abandon their culture, effectively erasing their identity. This made them second-class citizens with no rights or means to escape poverty while demonizing them to everyone else. It still affects the communities of First Nations people in Canada, and mass graves of children are still being found. Despite many people complaining that they receive too much, I do not believe we are doing enough. Canada still does not honor many of the treaties and continues to take land originally promised to First Nations people. Story 94. Our ancient capital Anuradhapura had a Buddhist stupa built in the 3rd century that, at 122 meters tall, was one of the tallest buildings in the world. Our modern capital Colombo only surpassed this with a skyscraper in 1986. So, for over 1,600 years, the tallest structure ever built in our country was not in its modern capital but in the ruins of its ancient one. Story 95. Nobody knows about is a bit of a stretch here, but being the first country to legalize visual pornography in the year 1969 is a nice coincidence. Story 96. To kill Giovanni Falcone, a judge, the Sicilian mafia set and detonated about 4 tons of explosives under a section of a highway. This is one of the reasons why I do not understand the appeal of media that romanticize the mafia or similar criminal organizations from Italy. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.